right, there you are, in all your beautiful glory, there, Lionel.
I like your logo in the back. That looks very nice. I like that.
Well, thank you very much. I'm the Cosmic Cowboy because, well, really haven't figured out. Well, I know why it is because I got a hat. It's a Stetson, and that's the first criteria.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we always talk about things that seem to be out there, so why not? The Cosmic really kind of fit. But man, speaking of being out there, Lionel, man, near-death experiences and UFO and strange encounters and you've had an extraordinary life. I don't want to say have. You are having an extraordinary life, but some strange things have happened to you and changed your view of life, I understand, from what I've been reading about you. So let's go back a little bit and tell us what you're about and kind of introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, so I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid era. I was a kid, and I was exposed to apartheid, from a very young age because it was around you. It was everywhere. And my father was an immigrant to South Africa from Latvia, and he found the apartheid system, pretty abhorrent, which it was. There's no question of that. My mother was born in South Africa, and I was an only child. And after many years, my dad eventually said, it's enough of living under these conditions. It's time to leave the country. But where do you go? And my father was by trade a watchmaker. The days when they used to repair watches, mechanical watches, when people wore real watches, not electronic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, his life was all about fiddling little cogs and gears and wheels and things. And he took a job as a watchmaker and a manager of a tiny little jewelry store way up in Central Africa. And I had just finished my schooling, finished high school. And when they decided to leave the country, I said to my folks, I want to go with you. But my mother said, no, you're not. You're staying here and you're going to go to college and you're going to get yourself a degree. But I had always, more than anything else in the world, I always wanted to make movies. When they moved up to Central Africa, for me, that was like a dream come true because I had gone to see all the Tarzan movies at the local movie house in the little town where I grew up. And, I was exposed to, people probably don't even remember these films, things like The African Queen, King Solomon's Mines, all that kind of stuff. I saw all those movies and I wanted to make films like that, with a dream of eventually ending up in Hollywood. And so I said to them, no, I'm coming with you guys. And, which I did. And so I followed them up there. And when I got to where my dad was, took this job, I suddenly looked around me and there was nothing except there were copper mines, which is why this little store was up there in a little town, and nothing else. And I thought, what have I done? What is here for me to do? The road to Hollywood doesn't start here in the middle of the Central African jungle. How am I ever going to realize my dreams? Right?
Right.
And so, like manna from heaven, magic things happened. Somebody was looking after me because one day I saw a little tiny ad in the local newspaper about a television station that was opening up. It was owned by a British company, and they were starting a little tiny TV studio to serve the copper mining community. And I thought, oh my word, this is what I want. This is what I want to do. And I went knocking at the door, and and they said, all the major positions have been filled by people coming mainly from the United Kingdom, from London, and wherever else. We'll see if we can fit you in somewhere. And I said, I don't care what it is. I'll sweep the floors, I'll wash the windows, I'll do whatever you want. Just let me in, which they did. And so that was the start of my career. I started working in the props department. Taking care of, props that were used for live shows. It was a very tiny station. And after about 6 months of that, I went to the studio manager and I said, you've got to allow me a chance to get behind one of those cameras. And he was a nice enough guy, an ex-British Army captain, by the way. That's his previous career was that before he became manager of the station. He said, "All right, I'll put you behind the camera. You can do a trial on some of the educational broadcasts that we do in the morning." Mm-hmm. Which I did. And because I had been making 8mm movies as an amateur since I was 11 years old back in South Africa, high school sporting events, my buddies' birthday parties, things like that, I was pretty good behind the camera. And they realized it. And so they said to me, okay, you got a job. You can go behind the camera. And that's where my career began. And it was wonderful because in the mornings we had educational broadcasts. In the afternoons we had cultural programming, is what they called it, for local tribal communities living in the area, where people would arrive in truckloads, with drums and grass skirts and beads and, thump and drum and sing and dance in the studio. And at night, we had every American and British show that you guys saw here, we had there at night. Everything was on film. We were like a week behind the rest of the world. So I lived in like this, this multicultural world. And it was wonderful. And then one day in 1964, the territory I'm talking about was called Northern Rhodesia, which was a British colony. And when Britain was giving up its empire and giving away all its colonies, in 1964, this territory called Northern Rhodesia became the Republic of Zambia. So it got its independence. And when that happened, we all got pink slips. All of us white guys at the station, we got pink slips to say, you've done a great job. Thank you very much, but bye-bye. In 6 months' time, you're out of here. All of your positions that you guys have are going to be filled by local people. Well, we understood that. We could understand their thinking. But my dilemma was, now what? What do I do now? And we had a guy working for us at home, a black guy, of course, from the Bemba ethnic group in Zambia. And he and I were very good friends because he wanted always to be a photographer. And so we spent a lot of time talking about cameras. And the next day after I got this little pink slip, I went to him and I said, David, a terrible thing has happened. I've been fired. In 6 months' time, I've got to leave the station, the studio, but I may have to leave the country. And I don't really want to go back to South Africa because apartheid was still raging at the time. We're talking about 1964 here. And I don't know what to do. And he said, I'll find you someone who can help you make up your mind what to do. And I thought, well, whatever it is you have in mind, I totally trust you. I have no idea what you have in mind, but okay, you're on. What do we do? So it comes along, Thursday afternoon, whatever it was, the following week. There was David, our servant, and myself in my little beat-up VW Beetle, bumping through the bush on a dirt road to a tiny, tiny village in the outskirts of a town called Ndola. I had no idea what was in store for me. I had no idea what David had in mind, but I trusted the guy implicitly, And we arrived in this little hamlet of a place, this village, and he went to this little hut and he said, I think this is the place. And he went to this little tiny little hut with a single door and one window, and he knocked on the door, and this ancient little old lady arrived, hovered, bent over like this. She opened the door and with her bony finger, she welcomed us into her hut. She was also a Bemba woman. She spoke no English at all. And I thought, what on earth, is this woman going to do for me? What is this all about? But, I put my hand in trust. I just felt that something might happen that day, and something sure did, because we went inside her little hut, and she said she was talking in Bemba. David was translating, and she told us to sit down on the floor, and there was a little grass mat on the floor. And on the grass mat was a little bag, an animal skin bag. And she told me to pick up the bag, blow into it, say my name, turn the bag upside down, which I did. And what fell out were a bunch of bones, little tiny bones the size of chicken bones. Wow. And a few other things, and a couple of dice, maybe a marble or two, and a bottle top, a couple of pebbles. These were the tools that this woman used because she was a shaman. And she read the bones for me. The way these things fell on the mat had a message for her. And she was translating for me what she was seeing in this pattern of bones and stuff lying on the mat. She basically told me, through David, through the interpreter, every single thing that came true for the next 60 years. She predicted almost my entire life. And I suddenly realized there and then, that day, that the world as we know it is not as it seems at all. And it was proven to me that day in this little old lady's hut, because she foresaw events that there's no way she could have known anything about. Um, she said to me, she said to David things like, he must be very, very careful because one day he's going to go across the big water and he's going to go in that direction. And she points to the north. And she said, and when he gets to the other side of the water, he's going to do more of the kind of work he's doing now. But there are big lights there, big lights. She was talking about Hollywood. She foresaw the studios of Hollywood. She said to him, she said to David, she said, tell him to be very careful, but one day in his work he's going to be also on the big water, and that water is almost going to kill him because the thing that he's on is going to almost be destroyed. I had no idea what she was talking about. And years and years and years later, I was on a research ship in the Southern Ocean, and we almost capsized at sea. And it was only when it happened that I suddenly realized, oh my God, that's what that woman foresaw. You know, everything that she told me that I would be married twice. She told me how many kids I would have. Everything came true, everything. And one of the most amazing things, Daniel, that she told me, which I had no understanding of at the time, was she said to David, she said, tell him that one day he's going to meet a man who was very, very close to the most evil man who ever lived. I had no idea what she meant. So cut 20 years into the future, and now we're talking about the mid-'80s, and I'm doing a series of television shows on the history of aviation in Africa, in South Africa, the story of South African Airways. And in our research, we found out that in the 1930s, this airline had bought aircraft from a German company, the Junkers Aircraft Company. They no longer make commercial airliners today, but those days they did, back in the 30s. And they ordered 3 new, or I think 5 new airliners from this particular company. They were very much like the American Ford Trimotor, you know, with an engine in the nose and one on each wing. They were metal-skinned airplanes, which were radically new for their time. And these planes were flown all the way down from Germany to South Africa, down the length of Africa. Now, that's a big deal in the 1930s. No meteorological services, no weather forecasts, no airports to stop on the way in case you have technical problems. It was a major expedition to do that. And one of the pilots who actually flew one of these delivery flights, we learned that this guy was still alive. And the minute I heard this, I thought, wow, you know, we've got to interview him. He's got to be in this show. So together with the Foreign Office of the German government, we tracked him down. And we found him that he was retired. He was like 89 years old or something at the time. He was retired in a little tiny town near Munich. And so we went to go and interview him. And the night before I did the interview, we had a fairly big crew. We had, 2 vans with crew, photographers, and whatever else. There was the guy from the German Foreign Office was there, plus other folks from the German aviation industry, because this man was very well known. And apparently, he was well known for reasons that I didn't quite understand at the time, because the night before we did the interview, the guy from the Foreign Office, the German Foreign Office, he said, how much do you really know about this man? His name was Hans Baur, B-A-U-R. How much do you really know about Kapitan Hans Baur? And I said, well, what else is there to know? I know he did that delivery flight. That's all I want to know, from him in this interview. Why? What else is there to know? And he, sort of beckoned me closer to him. This is after about 3 good bottles of good Rhine wine at midnight, and he says to me, he says, do you know that this man was Adolf Hitler's personal pilot? Well, when he told me that, I mean, you could have blown me over like a feather. First of all, I sobered up instantly. And the next day when I met the guy, I wasn't quite sure how to deal with the interview because he was Adolf Hitler's personal pilot.
Wow.
That's a big deal. Yeah. You don't get to interview people like that every day.
Nah.
So I did interview the guy, and I was told, by the way, by the man from the German Foreign Office, don't discuss anything other than that delivery flight in the 30s. Do not discuss the Second World War, nothing. I said, no, I won't. Why would I? It's not what I'm here for. That's not what the interview's about. But anyway, so we did the interview. The interview was good. The guy spoke only German, and this man was translating for me. And at the end of the interview, Kapitan Hans Bar, he stood up and he said to me, "I want to show you something." And we get up and he's speaking German to me, and we go to the end of this living room where we did the interview. Now cables all over the place and lights and things. And where the living room ended, there was a little nook there to the bathroom, and on the wall there was a photograph. And in the photograph was one of these airplanes that we've been discussing in the interview. Mm-hmm. But standing in front of the aircraft was him and Adolf Hitler. Hans Bar, was wearing his uniform, and I suddenly realized, oh my God, he was a member of the SS because he had the skull and crossbones on the helmet. Hmm. And he says to me in German, "This is me, and that is," and I said, "Yeah, I know who that is." And he said, "Would you like to know more?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" And so he calls his wife, and the wife brings all these photograph albums, and he puts the albums down in front of me, and we sit down on this couch in his living room. And it's a history of the Third Reich. Everybody who was anybody in Hitler's close-knit inner circle are in these photograph albums, and he is in many, many of these photographs. That's how close he was with Adolf Hitler. And in fact, he tells me he'd been married 3 times. His very first wedding, when he had his first wedding in Munich, Adolf Hitler gave him his wedding party. Wow. In Adolf Hitler's apartment. That's how close he was to Adolf Hitler. So I spent the rest of the day being shown inside the inner workings of the Third Reich with this man, and so that in itself is quite a story. But as we were driving away, at the end of the day, I eventually said to the crew, "Come on, let's get the cables all wound up. It's time to leave." It's like 6:00 in the evening. Right. And as we were driving away, I looked back through the rear window of this van, and there he was outside his house, waving goodbye to me with his wife next to him. It was like an old couple saying goodbye to friends, and it suddenly hit me. Oh my God. I have just shaken hands and spent a day with a man who was closer to Adolf Hitler than probably anybody else, because Hitler trusted nobody. There were many attempts on his life, but this guy apparently, he trusted implicitly. He didn't doubt him at all. And it was only then that I suddenly realized that's who that woman was talking about. How did she know that in a grass hut in Africa over 20 years ago, she foresaw this event? So that's just some tiny examples of what I'm talking about, of what went on in that little, mud hut of hers in the Central African sun years and years ago.
Well, Lionel, let me break in here, because when you originally said how in the beginning that you sort of got kicked out of what you were doing, and you didn't know what to do, and so this and that. I've got a little bit of my life track is a little bit like that, because in 2003, I walked into a radio station in Indianapolis, and I said, "Hey, I got an idea for a show that's unlike anything that you guys have, and it'd be a call-in show." And the station manager, and I said, if you give me 2 hours on Saturday night, I'll build you a website and I'll host it and I'll take care of it. I'll market your station. Yeah. And I was shocked. He said, "Okay." And about 2 years later, a Hispanic broadcasting network bought that station and kicked all the English people out. That's because I know when you said everybody got kicked out, I was kicked out. And I thought, what am I going to do? So then I ended up, it was good anyway, because I went to streaming, and then I added video, and I had a bunch of things I couldn't do at the radio station. So I had my life track kind of brought me that way too. But before we continue, let me recognize a couple people that's logged in there in our live chat. In addition to what I've already announced, we have a Reload Skidmark, Tom Cat, Richard Argon, Max Vogan, DS Shotgun, Lucky Scotty, Life Station, and Mr. W. All welcome to the program. On our Newsmaker line tonight, we do have Lionel Friedberg, and we're talking about his life track and ancient mysteries, and how he came to really have his life belief altered by very mysterious things. And Lionel, we've already got questions coming in. We'll take a couple of those, and we'll get back to your life track story too. This is from Put Yahweh First. Says, Lionel, have you seen No, I'm gonna butcher this. Maleki Mbembe in Africa.
No, I have not, and I do not know who that is.
All right. Rose says, Lionel, what is a shaman? Are they sort of like witches, or is that a lie they create about the shamans?
Well, that's an old white man's point of view, you know. That goes back to the early days of the movies, if you like. It goes before the movies. When colonization was happening in Africa, you know, and people were settling Africa from Europe mainly, and they saw these people, you know, with bones and stones and predicting the future and foretelling people's lives and diagnosing illnesses and all the rest of it. They said, you know, these are witches. And so they gave them the term witch doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how that stuck. So there are two sides to the story. In answer to this person's question, our concept was up until recently, you know, that a witch doctor is the sort of person that I'm kind of talking about now. But really, it isn't anything to do with being a witch doctor. A shaman in Africa, and particularly in the areas where I have worked and lived and had lots of experiences, primarily Southern Africa, you know, they call themselves sangomas. Now, sangoma is a Zulu word, which basically means one who's able to see into the future. And they wear many hats, these folks. They can go out into the boondocks, into the middle of nowhere, and come back with a bunch of berries and leaves and barks and, you know, stuff that they dig out of the ground and concoct medication for someone who has an illness. And 9 times out of 10, these people get cured. So they can be healers. They can be communicators with your ancestral spirits. And the whole paradigm of the African shaman, the sangoma, is this: it's all done through the ancestor. The shaman, the sangoma, that person's ancestor connects with the patient's ancestor, and in the spirit world they have a discussion, and then that message is given to the shaman through the way the bones fall on the grass mat. And that's how this person interprets what your future may be, or why your wife has run off with someone else and who that someone else may be, or where you lost the wallet that you say, you know, you lost. They do all kinds of things, but it's all to do with communicating with the ancestors. And
I'm wondering if they can tell Will Smith who his wife Jada is banging. All right, let's get another question. And there are some things that you're related to Hollywood, obviously. And put y'all away first, says Lionel, are there any good people in Hollywood?
Are there any good people in Hollywood?
Mm-hmm.
Sure there are. There are lots of good people in Hollywood. Yeah, there are lots of bad people too. But the problem is that, you know, I mean, people sometimes get maybe the wrong impression of Hollywood people. Well, we must understand that actors particularly, you know, these guys cannot get up in front of a camera and a crew of 100 people and deliver their lines and act to pretending to be somebody else without having an ego, because without the ego, you cannot be someone else. And so there's a lot of ego in this business, particularly amongst the acting community. And so that's maybe where people misinterpret these people. They sort of think they've got monstrous egos, you know, larger than life. And to a very large extent, that is true. But that's how they manage to do what they do. When it comes to the producers and the Harvey Weinsteins and guys like that, well, that's another story entirely. But believe me, everybody is not like that at all. Most people who work in this business are dedicated professionals, hardworking people, absolutely honest, down and out, decent folk who put in, you know, a very, very hard day's work, 6 days a week, in order to bring us the movies that we love and the television shows that we like, you know, and they're hardworking folks. They're not evil and they're not bad.
Okay. Richard Aragon says, Lionel, why, or no, this is about the pilot, said, did the pilot's eyes look evil? Obviously connected to Adolf Hitler.
Not in the least. He actually had the most very pleasant, pale blue eyes. He was a very, very pleasant looking guy. You know, and I have to tell you, and the guy who asked the question, you know, when I was doing this interview with this man, for me, because I've interviewed a lot of folks in my time as a documentary filmmaker, you know, I've lost count, from politicians to scientists to you name it. And when I was interviewing this guy, I thought, how are you going to deal with this? And, you know, and what you have to do is you have to have a mindset that deals with the situation. You've got to be very, very tightly focused. And I saw him as nothing other than a pilot, a professional person doing a professional job of flying an airplane under very difficult circumstances back in the 30s, in the day when, there weren't all these facilities that we have today, or the reliability of airplanes today and engines and things. It was very, very tough those days to do what he did. So I had to narrow my view down to him in that sense. I didn't think of him, as being part of the whole Nazi regime and all of that, which he was. But, you have to be very, very careful and don't be too judgmental, because in actual fact, his behavior was very, very, conducive, and he was very sweet, very nice. So was his wife. But behind that lurked the fact that, he was a very, very close friend of Hitler, who we know has gone down in history as one of the nastiest guys this side of Genghis Khan. Perhaps more so.
Well, you've met some top-notch people, of course, and one of those is right there.
Yeah.
Charles Heston. Now, what's it like to meet somebody in that caliber?
Well, I've been used to, and I don't want to sound, bold or brash or arrogant about this at all. I've worked with so many really good people in my time that you eventually get used to that. You have to treat them with respect, of course. This particular shot that you see there, I did a show for American Movie Classics on the history of Cecil B. DeMille. Cecil B. DeMille was a great film director, and Charlton Heston's first couple of movies were with Cecil B. DeMille, including The Greatest Show on Earth back in 1951, which won the Best Picture that year. And he was the host of the show, and he knew C.B. DeMille extremely well. And Chuck Heston was a very, very nice guy. I mean, yeah, you had to be respectful. You couldn't. There were certain lines that you don't cross, but that's just part of the course. When you work with actors in a studio environment, and you work very, very, very closely, particularly if you're a member of the camera crew, where your lenses and your equipment and you are in their face all the time. Eventually they get to know you, and you get to know one another. But as long as you're respectful, it's fine. He was a great guy. I liked him enormously, and I thought he was a terrific actor in his time. I mean, this guy was just amazing, And then Debbie Reynolds was another person who was just an absolute charming, wonderful woman. And she was in one of my favorite movies of all time, Singing in the Rain. I mean, how can anyone ever forget? It's an American classic, and she was in it. She was the star of the show.
Did you, she's also known for her afterlife beliefs. Did you discuss any of those things with her?
Oh, no, I didn't. I would have loved to have, but I did not, no.
Well, that was really kind of like later, I guess, from the movie era, that seemed like after she stopped doing them, she started delving into things like that, like maybe, different, like coming back from the dead or something like that. All right, hey, Rose has this question for you. Lionel says, how did you sell the idea of having shows about aliens and UFOs? A lot of people were ridiculed for just believing in the paranormal in the beginning.
Well, we still are. I mean, many times I can't talk to most folks about that subject because they laugh at me. They laugh at me. And I've stopped trying. But when the very first show I did on the topic, I think, was actually predated Ancient Aliens by a number of years. This was back in the mid-90s. And I don't remember the network. I think it was probably A&E. It was part of a series that I was doing with Leonard Nimoy called Ancient Mysteries. And one of the shows that we did was to look at, is there any evidence in ancient history of examples of UFOs? Did the ancient pharaohs see it, and did the Mayans see it? And the answer to that is yes, they did. And you can see evidence of this in certain hieroglyphs and in certain temple walls in Egypt, all over Mesoamerica, Central America. There is evidence of encounters that people have made pictures of and paintings of. Even in the deserts of China and Australia, there are images on cave walls and things of strange objects, of circular objects. These seems to be going on for thousands of years. So no doubt that they're around. But when you talk to most folks, they still laugh at you. I have to be careful. Even members of my own family, when the minute I bring up the topic, they say, "Oh yeah, here we go again." But it's a subject that maybe one of these days there might be some kind of disclosure about what's really been going on, and I would hope that would be the case, because obviously something has been going on for a long, long time. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. We go back to the year 1966, and I'm in Canada, and I'm doing a documentary there for the National Film Board of Canada, and the subject of the film is housing, how towns and urban areas develop, and why. Why do people go and live in the middle of the prairies, and why do folks gather and start a town? Well, it's usually because of some kind of agricultural activity or whatever. But we were filming in the province of Saskatchewan, and there was a potash plant. Now, potash is the stuff you dig out of the ground. They use it for fertilizer and various other reasons. And so a town was forming around this plant. And so we used that as the example of the catalyst that starts urban development. Yeah. It's in the middle of nowhere. And we stayed, the crew, there were only 3 or 4 of us on this crew. And those were back in the days of station wagons. We had a station wagon, and we were driving towards this potash plant to go do our filming. Early in the morning, we were all at this little motel. And as we got closer to this plant, there was this cloud of smoke where they were digging, the mining activities, made a white, dust, and there was a sort of cloud sitting above the plant in the sky. And as we got closer to it, this cloud got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when we got to the main gate of this plant, the guy at the gate said, "You fellas better get down to the parking lot, because there's something up in that cloud up there." Wow. It's like, what, Yeah. What? So, we don't know, but there's something up there. I said, well, like, what is it? What is it? We said, I don't know, but it's up there. So anyway, we drive down, and I wasn't directing. I was, just a member of the camera crew. So the director, Lee, gets out, and he goes and talks to the manager of the plant about the filming that we're going to do that day. And he said to me, "Why don't you set up the camera and put on the longest lens, like a telephoto lens, if you like, and see if you can see anything up there," which I did. And a couple of guys who worked at the plant came over to me smoking, and they said, "Yeah, there's something up there, maybe you could see it. We saw it this morning." And, I was desperately trying to find something in this cloud, and I saw nothing until a little breeze came by. And the cloud sort of shifted. And the minute that happened, there it was. There was a sharp reflection of metal. And I focused up on it, and there, as clear as a bell, was the circular object just sitting up there in the cloud. No sound, no windows, no noise, no propulsion system evident, nothing. It just sat there, the circular thing, and like a triangle structure beneath it. Wow. And I ran some film. We were using film those days. This is long before the days of video. We were shooting film, and I ran film of this object. I must have shot about 4 or 5 minutes of it, but it wasn't doing anything. So, eventually I turned off the camera, and that's the end of that story. The cloud eventually moved back there.
And that sounds like a story that you can't tell your people. You can't tell them that one.
Well, no, I did. When the director came out and said, "Did you see anything?" I said, "Yeah, I did," and I got film. There's film. He said, "Oh my God, that's amazing."
You had proof. So hey, they had to. They couldn't comment.
Yeah, but let me just tell you this, because here's the thing: we talk about cover-ups. We eventually get back to Montreal to go and look at the dailies, what we call dailies. The stuff that you shot, and we're looking at all this footage that we shot about the plant and the town. And there in the dailies is this object as clear as a bell, And so the head of the camera department says, "Oh my God, that's absolutely weird. Why don't we send that down to the United States?" Because apparently in Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, there's a thing called Project Blue Book. Maybe those folks can make some sense out of it. So we had the editor remove that piece of film, and it was sent. This was before the days of FedEx and before the days of, you know, of carriers like we had now. I think it was sent through the mail, and Project Blue Book actually signed for this footage that we sent them.
Nice.
And weeks go by and nothing happens, and I go on another project, and eventually I went to the camera department one day and I said, "Did we ever hear back from those guys?" And Frankie Johnson was her name. I'll never forget her name. Frankie Johnson. She said, "Oh yeah, that stuff we sent down to the States. Let me call them." Well, the time difference didn't allow her to call that day, but the next day she did. And she calls me into her office and she said, "I want to tell you something." And I go there and she says, "They denied ever receiving the footage." Well, we know they got the footage because they signed for it. So, is there a cover-up? You betcha something's been going on to cover up the fact that this stuff exists.
And that really pisses me off. Okay, I just don't like that. It's like, who put them in charge of what we're able to receive and not? I just don't like that. Let me welcome to the show Roxy W. and Freely Speaking to join us in the live chat. If you have a question for our guest Lionel, put your questions in the live chat, and our moderator will send it to us. By the way, Lionel, we have a poll question really kind of related to your topic tonight, but it actually is about paranormal activity. I don't know if you've seen it, but people have the ability to vote on these basically two polls. Have you had a near-death experience, and what paranormal activity have you experienced? Right now, 30% of the respondents say they have seen flying orbs. 19 have had an alien encounter. 16 an angelic encounter. 11% said they've seen a ghost. 11%, sorry for these folks, have had demonic incursions. So so we'll see if those numbers change as we talk about these sort of esoteric subject tonight. But let's get to another couple of questions and we'll get back to you. Freely Speaking says, Lionel, are you familiar with the findings of Credo Mutwa, a Zulu Sangoma from South Africa?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. He was grossly overweight, and he suffered from diabetes. Credo was a wonderful man, and a very well-known Sangoma. He was known around the world, and he wrote a marvelous esoteric history of the Zulu people. And by the way, Zulu, the word Zulu means from the sky. And, he said, that my people are not from here; they're from somewhere else. The word Zulu means sky.
Sky people.
We are the sky people, yeah. And, I have asked many times when I worked on ethnographic films, be they with tribes or whatever in rural areas in many parts of Africa, I've always asked the question of either the local chief or the headman, at the appropriate moment, have you ever seen anything in the sky? Have you ever seen anything at night? And invariably the answer has been yes, of course. We have, they're around all the time. So there's nothing uncommon. And to a lot of those people, it's just an everyday occurrence. It's not a big deal. It happens all the time. And they've been seeing it for hundreds and thousands of years. So why even talk about it,
Okay. And now Rose says, Lionel, have you had any kind of paranormal encounter with aliens, angels, etc.?
I have not had any direct encounters myself with angels, but or aliens. But I've talked to a lot of people who have, and fortunately, I live in LA, and LA is not too far from Palm Springs. And once every year, this was going on for many years until COVID put an end to it. There's an event called Contact in the Desert. Some of your listeners may know about that. And I go to Contact in the Desert regularly every year until COVID ended that. Hopefully we'll be going back, maybe even this year. We'll see. I hope we are, because, I've met all those guys and all the speakers, and I know them. And it is a fascinating place to go and talk to people like that. And anyone can go. So I cannot recommend highly enough, if anybody is really interested in the paranormal or in alien encounters or anything of that nature, go to Contact in the Desert. It is a wonderful, wonderful place where you will meet like-minded people like yourself. And you can talk about the stuff freely without being embarrassed or without being shouted down as being an idiot. They take it seriously. I have sat in on a number of experiencer sessions people who have described, being abducted at night from their beds, and even in backyards, and listen to their stories. And some of their tales are absolutely extraordinary, absolutely amazing, and I don't doubt for one moment, because most of the cases I've heard, maybe some of them are not entirely real, and maybe some of these people have really vivid imaginations, but 90% of what I have heard and the people I've spoken to are absolutely convincing to me. These things really happened. And I know of a remarkable guy who is originally from Guatemala. He talks about these amazing experiences he has. He's traveled, in space. He's gone to other planets. There's an organization, folks may know about this. This doesn't fall into the world of the wanna believes. This is an actual fact. In Virginia, there's an institute known as the Monroe Institute. And the Monroe Institute is an absolutely remarkable place, because people can go there. Mainly, burnt out businessmen. They need to go out there. They need to basically just debrief themselves and, get back get their breaths back again after, from the business world. They go there and they are exposed to audio waves, which elevates one's consciousness. And I have talked to people who don't believe in any of this stuff, but after having experienced going to the Monroe Institute and going to another realm, if you like, of consciousness, tell me, that they have traveled, to other parts of the universe. There's a guy, and I'm not going to mention names because I know he wouldn't want me to do that. And he used to work for NASA. And he said, I have met my father, who's now deceased. I've met my grandfather, and I've met all of their grandfathers. Whoa. On my travels, and I don't doubt for one moment that he's telling me the truth. This is a nuts and bolts guy who designs rocket engines. He doesn't make up this stuff.
Yeah, you would think he wouldn't be talking fool stuff there. Hey, let's get to another question here for you. It says, and this is from our moderator, Jay. It says, Lionel, of all the subjects you've studied concerning unexplained phenomena, which one or ones are the most memorable to you? Question.
That's an interesting topic. It probably, my answer to that would probably be less spectacular than this guy would be hoping me to say. But I have to say that I think what I have learned more than anything else is the fact that we are all, I believe, we're all in some way or another connected. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. I was on a safari film in 1967 in a country called Mozambique. At that time, Mozambique was basically a colony of Portugal, and it sits on the east coast of Africa. And I was on a safari with a guy who invented the hula hoop and the frisbee, a man by the name of Spud Millen. He had a toy company, Whammo Toys, here in California. And he went out there on safari with two of his buddies. One was a stockbroker, one was an insurance agent. And they went there on safari to go and hunt animals. And he wanted a film made about that safari. And I was a loner, just me, and a camera. And I was given an assistant to, carry all my bits and pieces and the accessories and whatever else, to make a film about what these guys were doing, and to make a film about this their hunting safari. And it was very, very well mounted. It cost a lot of money. At night there was martini flowing and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't rough and tumble, believe me. It was very luxurious. And we had two white hunters who led the safari. And comes the time now for one of the guys, the stockbroker. It was his turn to actually shoot an elephant. For part of their license included shooting various animals. They each could take one elephant. And it was his turn to get an elephant. And we tracked this herd on foot for 2 days. We actually slept in the boondocks, in the bush one particular night. No sleeping bags, no nothing, because we're following this herd. And the next day we found the herd, and the white hunter points out to this guy, to this American guy. He says, "See that old bull over there on the right hand side of the herd? That's the one you wanna go for. He's an old guy. He's been, basically he's lost his place in the hierarchy of the herd. You can take him out, but don't touch the others. But don't miss.
Right.
And so, all this is happening, and of course, we position ourselves out of, not, in the right direction, so the wind didn't take our scent towards them, and all sorts of things. And I positioned myself right behind the guy with the rifle who's going to shoot the elephant. So I've got a shot of the herd, him directly in front of me, the herd in the background, and I'm shooting over his shoulder, and he's got his gun, and he's going to shoot this elephant. And behind me is the white hunter telling him what to do, So my shot is perfectly framed for what is about to happen. And if he shoots, and of course he misses.
Uh-oh.
And there was absolute chaos because the herd went crazy. They went shooting in every which way, plundering. It was like an earthquake. And when the dust settled, there was one female left behind. She hadn't moved. And then we realized why. Because she had a baby next to her, which we hadn't seen in the herd. There was a baby next to her, a young elephant. And all she did was she stared at this guy with a gun in front of me. And she flapped her ears like this. And she said, you could see that she was really angry. This man was threatening the life of her baby. And she started to charge him. So I'm here. He's in front of me. And now you have an elephant charging towards us at full whack. She wants to kill him. And all I could hear in my ear at the back was, run, run, run. I couldn't move because, I've got this heavy camera. There's a guy next to me with a wet cell battery pack, which weighs a ton. I couldn't move, but the guy in front of me, this American guy, runs out of my frame, and all that's left is just me and this elephant charging towards me. Now, she wasn't angry with me, but she couldn't stop herself now. She would have run right into me and killed me. And at the very, very last minute, she must have been maybe 10 feet away from me. There was over in my ear here with this bam, and the white hunter shot her.
Oh.
She looked at me. And I felt awful for her because this was a mother protecting her baby. And she fell down, on her legs toppled and she fell down. And very, very slowly she heaved over onto her side. Her eyes were locked with mine, completely locked with mine. And slowly the eyes, you could see the life going out of her eyes, and she died. And I felt a connection with the spirit of that elephant. And I use the word spirit of that elephant in every sense of the word. She had a spirit, and I felt that spirit, and she felt mine. I know that. That night, we back at base camp. Everybody's nurturing their martinis, and I'm thinking to myself, sitting in the corner of this big grass hut, base camp lounge area that they had there, and I'm nurturing my drink, and I'm thinking, I could have been killed today. I could have died. And I suddenly realized this is another one of the predictions that little old lady gave me, that little old shaman, way, way back years ago. She told me, be very, very careful, because in the bush one day you will meet a beast, and that beast will almost kill you. She predicted this. And I suddenly realized, well, here's another example of what that woman foresaw. Now, to get back to the theme of your question, I put that out of my mind, and we cut ahead, to many, many years. And every single time I have been back to Africa and gone to consult with the sangomas, the shamans, particularly on health issues, because I developed a health issue, which is one of the reasons why I went back to Africa, to basically try and find a way to get healed, because I was seriously ill. I had developed an autoimmune kidney condition. And I had great doctors here in LA, but I wasn't getting any better. And a friend of mine who's a surgeon, he said, why don't you go back and maybe those guys can help you? So I met a lot of sangomas in the ensuing years. Every single time they threw the bones and interpreted my illness for me, the very first thing that they would say was, what is this elephant that we see around you? So I have learnt, and I know, that the spirit of that elephant and I still communicate with one another. That poor mother of that poor calf that was killed that day, she's still with me. She's still around me. And I think that she's providing some sort of protective element to me in my life. And I feel that. I'm surrounded, by the way, you can't see my surroundings here, but I've got elephants everywhere. On every shelf in my office, there's an elephant that hangs from the mirror in my car, because I know that elephant and I are still connected to this day. And I think that, so what is the lesson of this? Is that we humans and the animal kingdom can form a connection, a spiritual link, a spiritual connection, that we are all connected in some strange and mysterious way that I don't fully understand. That for me has been the most amazing discovery in answer to the question that guy posed.
Well, Lori Tillman in the live chat says, Lionel, what happened to the baby elephant?
Oh, the baby elephant, obviously the baby wasn't drinking on the mother, so she was eventually absorbed back into the herd, and I'm sure that she was eventually she eventually became an adult member of that particular herd of elephants. But elephants are extraordinarily intelligent, and I believe understanding creatures. I don't know if folks. I have looked into the eye of a whale. I was on an expedition to Antarctica, and we had all these whales on the side of the ship one day, and one whale surfaced, and this big eye came up out of the ocean. And when I looked at the eye of this whale, what? I could see intelligence behind that eye. And people talk about, they're very strange. I did another series years later for National Geographic, where I was based in Monterey, up in Central California. And Monterey has one of the world's finest aquariums. And in this aquarium, there's a giant octopus there, a huge, very old octopus. And this octopus knew its keeper. When its keeper came to feed it, it recognized it. And I would go there regularly, to go and look at this octopus. And one day, it left its little burrow, and it came up to the glass, and again looked at me, and I looked into its eyes, and again I felt the same sensation as I did when I looked into the eyes of the whale. So whether it's an octopus or a whale or an elephant or whatever, we are all linked. We're all one. We look very different. We behave very differently. We don't speak the same language. Some of us can build rocket ships. Others just hang around in the bush and eat grass. But we're all connected.
There's a couple stories in the Bible, I think, about talking animals. One of them was, I think, Balaam's donkey, and the guy kept hitting the donkey, tried to get him to go somewhere, but he wasn't going anywhere because he saw an angel. But I think it's one of the few times where an animal where there's this story where what is the animal thinking is revealed. And to me, that's almost like a human-like thing. Why you hit me? I'm not going there. There's something right in front of me. So, I always wondered about that. What do animals think? And it's clear. I think what you're suggesting, Lionel, is that animals have a soul. Certainly, American Indians believe that, and specific animals have specific reasons.
There's no question of that. There's no question of that.
So,
no question.
Okay, well, let's get to another question for you. This is from Freely Speaking. Said, Lionel, can you discuss the work of Dr. John Mack, the psychiatrist, Harvard Medical School, who conducted numerous studies on alien abductions?
I'm not familiar with his work at all.
Okay.
A lot of people have done research like that, but I'm not familiar with this man's work. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. All right, let's go to this question. Rose says, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is Rose. Have you ever created a show for television that has left you dumbfounded? Like, I can't believe I did, I guess. Or that we found this out or some kind of thing.
Well, you threw up an image a while back for a show that I did called Beyond Death. And that was a 2-hour special that I did. Once again, I cannot remember the cable company that I did it for. It might have been A&E. It might have been one of those. I'm not sure. I forget. But it was the mid 90s, and it was a 2-hour special. That's it. Yeah. It was a 2-hour special, and the brief was this from the network: go and find out what happens to the consciousness of a person after the demise of the physical body. In other words, what happens to your thoughts? What happens to your consciousness? And if you want to use another word, use the word soul if you want to. What happens to that when the body dies? Does it go away? Where does it go? What happens to it? The sum total of your experiences, whatever makes you who you are, the nature of your being, your consciousness, your awareness levels, does that all just go? Are these just little neurons firing in your brain, or is it something else? Mm-hmm. And if so, what happens to it when the heart stops beating? Where does all this stuff go? So we did this. This is what the focus of the show was about. And I have to tell you that I met people who had near-death experiences that were astounded me. And I'll give you one example. And it's a well-known case. I won't use names, but the story took place in Atlanta, in Georgia. This poor woman had an aneurysm on her brain. And the only way they could get rid of it was to actually open up her skull and stop her heart, and then go into the brain, remove the aneurysm, and then close her up again. But the blood flow, while the heart was stopped, the blood was sent through a machine that kept the blood flowing, right? Mm-hmm. So clinically, she was dead for like 8 or 9 minutes. Her first name is Pam. I'll say that much. But folks can easily Google her and find her. She's out there, and she's told the story many, many times. And many people have quoted, this particular case often. And she was eventually resuscitated. She was revived after the surgery, which went on for hours and hours and hours. And when she came to, she said to her surgeon, the surgeon went in the next morning and said, "Pam, how are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I'm fine, doc. Thanks very much." And he said, you got any pain? She said, no. And he was asking her questions, and she said, "It was very strange watching what you did to me." And he said, "What do you mean by that?" And she said, "Well, after I had the anesthetic, I floated up out of my body. And I was in the corner of the operating room, mm-hmm. looking down at what you were doing to me." He said, "Oh, yeah, right, sure, I believe you, He didn't believe a word of it, of course. And he said, "Okay, you believe that you did that. You were dead, babe. You were actually dead at the time. You were clinically dead. You could not possibly have experienced what you're telling me you mm-hmm. did." And she said, "No, I saw all that." And he said, "All right, give me an example. Give me some proof. Make me believe you." And she said, "Okay, the time you asked the nurse to pass you that instrument and she dropped it and you scolded her?" Which he did. Wow. And he said to her, "You saw that?" And she said, "I sure did. Of course I did." And he said to her, "Honey, you were dead at that time." And she said, "Well, you may think so. I saw that happen." And here's something else that actually blew his mind. The surgery went on so long that he would have a little tape deck running in the corner of the operating room, mm-hmm. playing his favorite music, right? The surgeon. And she said to him, "By the way, I don't like your music." And he said, "Well, what do you remember hearing?" She named him, 6 or 7 of the songs that she heard on his playlist, from this tape deck. It was tape deck days before digital music. He said, "You actually heard the music that I was playing?" She said, "Yeah." The guy could not believe this, but it was obvious that her consciousness was as awake and as alive and as alert as a living person, but whereas she was actually clinically dead. But here's something even more amazing. I met a pediatrician in Seattle who works with kids, and these are kids who were clinically dead. And he did a study of these kids, not only his own patients, but from other surgeons as well. And they all knew about his work, and they would, bring their case studies to him. And he would make, he had a whole pile of examples of this. These were all kids under the age of 6 or 7. They were young children. And invariably, these kids, when they were clinically dead, they spoke about tunnels of light, people in white, angelic-looking beings. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Some kids called them angels. Some of the kids called them, "Oh, it was Jesus." Some of the kids said, "Oh, it was God." Some of the kids said, "Oh, that was Granny and Grandpa," who in actual fact were dead for years and years. Mm-hmm. Some of the kids actually said, "Oh, these were spacemen." But they all described these beings, these beings encased in beams of light, white light. They all described the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that they were all given a choice when they were on what they called the other side. They said we were in a room, and these beings came. Invariably, these children were given a choice to come back to mommy and daddy down here, or to stay on the other side with the angels or the spacemen or whatever these kids were seeing. And those kids who said, no, I want to go back to mom and dad, I want to go back again, those are the kids who survived the experience. And they all had similar stories to tell. None of these kids knew each other. Their stories were almost exactly similar, There's a remarkable compendium of stories that were compiled, and if I could remember the name, but I can't, I'm sure folks can find it, done by this amazing guy who I met while I was making Beyond Death. He put these stories together, and it was the story of two mothers whose sons both died under rather tragic circumstances. One woman, her son was killed while riding his motorcycle in a vacant lot on the outskirts of town in New Jersey, and he didn't realize there was a cable stretched across between two trees, and he was decapitated.
Ooh.
Other mother, and she was, I think, in upstate New York, she lost her son during surgery. He died on the operating table. And the amazing thing is that these two women, without knowing it, were each eventually, they started dreaming about their own sons after their sons had passed away. And each of their sons one day came to them in a dream and said, Mom, this is so-and-so, and named this person. And the amazing thing is that what was going on in the spirit world was that these two dead guys were seeing each other, of these two mothers, made friends with their sons. They made friends in the spirit world. And it was a long and involved and very circuitous road how these two women eventually got together and met. And we actually filmed the first time they got together. And when these two women got together for the very, very first time, they both had photograph albums of their sons. And the one woman said to the other, "That's your son? Well, that's the guy who my son introduced me to in my dream." And the other woman told the same thing to this woman. "Yeah. And in your book, that's your son? Well, that's the guy who my son brought to me in my dream."
Oh, wow. Well, let me ask you something, Lionel. The Bible has some of the most detailed descriptions of what happens when we die, including numerous conversations of people on this side talking to people in another dimension. And I mean, it's quite extensive, the stories that it tells about what happens when you die. Have you ever researched that in doing a film? Or did it ever in your interviews, like Even Beyond Death and others, did it ever lead you to look in the Bible to see if there's a cooperation to what these people are saying?
Well, I didn't do that directly, and I'm only talking about this Beyond Death 2-hour special that I did. This is the only show that I did on this particular topic. And it wasn't necessary to do that because people talk about this all the time. And I mean, this is the message that you hear from the pulpit. This is the message that you will hear in church. People talk about that. The priests, talk about this. They say this is what the Bible says. So we didn't address that. But in some instances, people that I interviewed, and I must have interviewed in the show, there must be about, and I wish it were possible because for a while, Beyond Death was available to look at free on YouTube. But for some reason, the network has pulled the show.
Oh.
It's no longer available. There was a time where people could go on and look at it on YouTube. It's gone now. But we must have interviewed about 30 or 40 people in the show under various circumstances. And, some of them did reference the fact that, yeah, what I learned in Sunday school and what my priest told me and so on, I now know it's true, People validated that fact.
Now, you said that the little old lady with the fingers, and that kind of scared me when you first said that. You said you see kind of these bony fingers. And I'm kind of thinking, wow, man, she's gonna put a hex on you, if a little lady's creeping around like that. But did she tell you about your end of life?
No, she didn't tell me about that, but she told me that I was going to develop this illness that I had.
Would you want to know?
I don't want to know. I don't think it's necessary to know. Why would I want to know that? No, I don't think so. I think there are some things which should remain a mystery because we're here for a purpose and we're here to learn. We're here to do the best we can. and we're here to live uh, as decent and as righteous and as noble and as worthwhile a life as we can. And I don't think there's any point in cutting corners by knowing how it's all going to end. We've just got to practice what we know to be the truth and what we believe to be the right thing to do. And I think that's what it's all about. We need not necessarily know the end of story, and then there should be an element of mystery. Why should we peek under the covers and find out what's going on?
Right.
We know that.
Right. We think that we want to know, but I don't think that we do. Speaking of near-death experiences, I never got to that poll. Right now we have respondents for have you had a near-death experience? 78% said no, but 21% of the respondents said they have had a near-death experience. That seems to me would really shake somebody's belief system up one way or another.
Yeah, and and that's a high number. 21. That's a big number.
Yeah, that is, and it's interesting too because when you look at numbers of people who have seen UFOs, it's in the millions.
Oh,
it's huge.
Absolutely.
So how is that? How is that still taboo and still be able to be ridiculed when so many people believe it and have experienced it? I don't get it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a question we keep asking all the time. Why is there still this air of mystery, and why is there still a cover-up going on? Because it is. We're not being told. Well, the Disclosure Act, or the Freedom of Information Act, if you like, has revealed some tiny truths to us. Now, the Pentagon has released that footage that was taken off the coast of San Diego.
The TikTok videos?
They were videos. These were videos
TikTok,
taken from two I think they were F-16s, flying off the deck of an aircraft carrier off the coast of San Diego, and they saw this object flying above the ocean, and it was diving underneath the water and then coming up, and it was behaving nothing like anything that we know. And that footage has now been released. You can actually see it, and that is available on YouTube. People can see it. But let me tell you something interesting, Daniel. I did a show when I did that show on early UFOs. There was always a story that Gordon Cooper. Now, Gordon Cooper was one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. He's one of the original Mercury 7. And in fact, the movie The Right Stuff, which people may remember from the 1980s, best-selling book, was a terrific movie, was basically about Gordon Cooper, and he was played by Dennis Quaid in the film. Anyway, there was always circulating in those circles in the sort of UFO fraternity that Gordon Cooper had seen UFOs when he was a young guy. I decided to ask him if he did, and we sought him out. We wanted to find where he is. Turns out he had a little office. He was quite elderly at the time. I think he was already in his 80s. He had an office at Van Nuys Airport here in LA. And I went to talk to him there. I went to see him. And I said to him, Colonel, he's retired, but I said to him, Colonel, would you be in my show about UFOs, about unidentified flying objects? And he said, heck yeah, absolutely. And I said, why? And he said, because you know what? We, Astronaut Corps, we had to sign an oath of secrecy, never to divulge anything that we had seen. And I have seen these things. They exist. I signed that act, and I've decided to break rank with NASA. There you go. That's exactly there you are. The thing behind you is what that footage looks like off the coast of San Diego. Almost exactly like what I'm seeing on the screen behind you right now. And he said, I'm breaking rank with NASA, and I am going out, and I've been saying this for years. They're here. They're real. I've seen them. And he told me the story before he became an astronaut, before he was chosen by NASA to become one of the original Mercury 7. He was stationed at Ramstein Air Force Base, United States Air Force Base in Germany, where he flew F-86 Sabres. These were Korean-era fighter jets. And he was based there. And one day he was scrambled. He and another airplane was scrambled to go and investigate an object flying over the skies of wherever Ramstein Air Force Base is. Right. Go and investigate and see if they could get pictures, photographs. These were reconnaissance F-86 cameras in the nose. And they flew up to this height. He said to me, I forget the exact height, but it was high. We're talking like 30,000 feet. And he said there was this circular object just sitting there, just sitting in the middle, just sitting there in the sky. And the minute we approached it, it darted away at like 5,000 miles an hour, and then suddenly stopped. And the minute we approached it again, boom, it went up higher than we could fly. He said these things defied the laws of physics as we know them. These are not of this earth. These are from someplace else. I can tell you that much. He was absolutely convinced of that.
Yeah, even you mentioned that they're in ancient history and in ancient pictographs and paintings. Certainly, the Bible talks about Ezekiel's wheel, which many say is a UFO. So that deserves to be looked into. The Bear from the Bear Report says, Lionel, is there a show you've always wanted to do but never have?
Wow, probably 155,000. I mean, yeah, no, there are lots and lots of topics. As a documentary filmmaker, you develop an insatiable appetite to want to know more. I just want to know everything. And I want to get out there and make movies about all kinds of stuff. And I've been very, 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 very blessed. I really have. I've made shows about all kinds of topics, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But there are so many more things I'd love to be able to do. There's no way that I could even quantify that and bring it down to a number. These are the 6 subjects I'd still like to do, because there are just too many of them. But I think the one that gave me the most satisfaction was a show I did for PBS about in the late 80s and the early 90s. There was a terrific science series on PBS called The Infinite Voyage. And these were really heavy science shows. One of the shows I did was on dinosaurs. One of the shows was about going down to Antarctica. But anyway, the one that really gave me the most satisfaction, and if I had to choose one topic out of the entire panoply of shows that I've done in my time, this would be it. And it was a retrospective of the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, the mission to the outer planets. These 2 spacecraft that took off that were launched in 1977. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, there were 2 spacecraft. They both went to Jupiter and then Saturn, and then Voyager 1 went off on a tangent off into space. But Voyager 2, because of the way the planets were aligned at the time, they could take advantage of the planetary alignment, and using the slingshot effect, which is the term that NASA uses for it, the gravitational pull of these planets. This Voyager 2 could go from Jupiter to Saturn to Uranus to Neptune, and then out into the deepest realms of deep space. And that was, for me, one of the most amazing shows I've ever worked on, because the amount of thinking and the amount of imagination and the amount of imagineering and the amount of anticipation and all that went into devising and creating this mission was just astounding. And the folks that I met, were just the nicest people I've ever met. What did they do? These 2 objects are humanity's calling cards. These are the calling cards of the human species.
Now, those ones with the gold disc.
Exactly.
Well, I got an idea. I got an idea for a movie for you. Like, I was just thinking, how about, because I haven't seen this movie yet, the history of Daniel Lott and the Edge broadcast. That sounds like a Gold Star Emmy winning award movie right there.
Give me a bit more details of that. What is that?
Yeah, Daniel Lott and the Edge broadcast. That's me.
Yeah.
And so I say that'd be a good movie to have. I think.
Oh, what, you do want to do a movie about it? Okay, yeah.
Did you get that? Okay.
I got it. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
I mean, anybody wears a hat on the internet deserves to have their own movie.
Well, you're not wearing a space helmet, so you're wearing a cowboy hat. Say, listen.
But I do got to tell you, Lionel, I've got aluminum foil underneath here, so the aliens can't penetrate with their thought rays and tell me, different things. But you've made been involved with numbers of documentaries: The Bible's Greatest Secrets, Prophets, Soul Catchers, Queen Esther, a lot of stuff going on here. Alchemy. I mean, you've looked you've looked into any of these subjects, and it sounds like there's a well-rounded view of a lot of things that's going on the planet from different points of view. So have you kind of come to a central conclusion of what life is about and what happens in the next life? Or are you still kind of searching and you can't really like gravitate toward a singular answer to that yet?
It's a good question, Daniel, and I'm going to answer it in this way. The very last page of my book, which is, you've thrown an image up on the screen, but the very last page of this book, not the last page, but the very last statement that I make in this book, which is one of the reasons why I wrote it, because I wanted to condense everything that I've learned over my years making movies about all kinds of topics that are absolutely compelling and, humbling in so many ways, is that I think of the world almost as a way of looking at, what do they call those cars at the fairground? They call them bumper cars or dodgem cars. What do they call those things?
Bumper cars, yeah.
Yeah. So at the back of a bumper car, there's an aerial that goes up,
right. Touches the ceiling because it's electric.
And connects to the electrical ceiling.
Sparks.
Exactly.
And it sparks.
And
it looks good.
And that's where it gets. And the sparks, yeah. And I can smell the sparks. I used to love those things as a kid.
Right.
And I think that we are all very similar to driving a bumper car. That's what I think of myself in the same way. And why do I say that? Because I think there's an aerial at the back of who I am, Okay. I'm connected to a field in the same way as these bumper cars are, to a field that connects all of us, all life. And I said, the words I use actually in the book is, whether you're a person or a pony or a petunia, we are all cut from the same cloth and we all belong to the same life force. Mm-hmm. We all are connected to a cosmic grid. I really do believe that. And I think we're all on a journey, no matter who or what we are, or what our level of sophistication or education or whatever may be. We're all on a journey. We're all here for a purpose. Do we understand the purpose? Perhaps not necessarily so, but the reason behind all of this. And we're all connected. And therefore, what does that teach you? Respect one another, respect all things, respect all life. There's a learning process here. That's why we're here.
I think the Bible says God holds all things together by the power of His word. And people used to believe that, say, you had a solid table, that it would be solid, maybe even a metal table. But Lionel, it's not solid. You go down far enough, there's space there in between the molecules. Nobody knows why they are there, what holds them in place, and why they do what they do. And it kind of goes with our end of life mystery that we were saying. Do we really want to know when our time is? Because there's a point in time, I'm sure, for each of us, and we don't know what that is, and we don't want to know. So, but we do have to live, like you just suggested, with love in our hearts and respect for all creatures and all people. You just can't go around disrespecting people and expect to have a fulfilled life. But if all things are held together, if there wasn't something holding together, everything would just explode. It would just go flying off into space and who knows where. So there is a mystery out there, and it's holding us together. And when you talk about that thing touching the electric thing and the sparks, I know that smell you're talking about, that electrical smell, smells like an armature in a stator on a rotor. But imagine if that's God and we're all connected with the spark of life. I mean, there's a lot of metaphors there that could be gleaned just from that little simple statement. So I'm in the learning processes like you are, and I have interviewed thousands of guests over the years, doing the show since 2004, every week. And I haven't made definitive statements on certain categories. I'm drawn toward conclusions. But I'm also willing to listen. I'm also willing to learn, and I don't have so much pride. And like I think you said in the first hour, the thing you got to have the what is that word? Is it envy? Something like that. You've got to have people have that pride or whatever. But I don't. I try to stay away from that so I can learn things, because it's better to learn from somebody else's mistakes than learn from your own. So if there's a better way or some truth or negative truth that somebody has, I want them on the show and see if they can bring us that little nugget of truth. But nobody has it all. No. That's what I found. Nobody has it all.
You're absolutely right. Yes, exactly. And this is something that we need to respect as we go on this, as we are on this journey. And we are on this journey for a purpose. Do we understand the purpose? Not necessarily. And I don't think it's important that we do. But the fact that we are blessed with this, we should relish that and value that and make the best of it that we can.
Well, that's another kind of thing one could say is you don't know when you're going, but live like you're going tomorrow. How would you live today if you know you're going to go tomorrow? If we live like that every day, and it seems to me that you're a person of life. It seems like you're gathering life any way you can. I can just see it. I can see that you love life, and you find it wildly interesting, and there's so many interesting subjects, and that's what always bothers me. We talked earlier how there's certain things you can't tell people or conversations you can't have with them, but
right.
Those people got to be the most boringest people ever. Can you imagine if we had these conversations of what life is about and where we're going, what's on the other side, who is God, why are we here? These are great subjects, and philosophers have pondered this forever. And when somebody says, I don't want to talk about that, I got to go to Walmart. I want to stay out of that. That's the conversation that I don't want to have. I'm not interested in that, Lionel. And everybody wants to do it. And what's the weather like? I don't want to know what the weather is like. I want to know if there's a ghost in the house. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
I mean, is that okay?
I quite agree with you. Totally, 100%. I'm with you, Daniel, all the way. Absolutely.
Well, hey, so you got this. I got the book in the background here, and it looks like a fantastic book. Where can people get that, Lionel?
You can get it on Amazon.com if you want to order it online, or any bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. They all sell the book. And if they don't have it on the shelves, they can order it for you. But it's available right now on Amazon. And if folks go to my website, which is my name, Lionel Friedberg, it's written up there, www.lionelfriedberg.com, they can actually read an excerpt from the book, and they can order directly from Amazon on my website if they so choose, or go to Amazon themselves. So it's available everywhere.
Now, do you have any new upcoming film projects?
I am currently working on a sci-fi project, which I'm very excited about. It's going to take a year of my life.
Whoa!
That's how long these things take to do. And I recently, finished a book on the history of aviation in Africa, which I enjoyed doing very much, because that's an untold story that folks don't really know about. It's just an amazing tale. But my big thing right now is trying to get the sci-fi piece together. I'm very excited about that.
What without spilling the beans or anything, what direction is that film going to take?
I can't say too much, and it's not a good idea to talk too much about the stuff. You know what I mean.
Okay.
You don't want to jinx it, but it touches on a lot of what we've been talking about.
Okay, good enough. Good enough. And there's several other books too. I was going to ask you, because we had that one screenshot of what was it called, Full Service. And you've been around people in Hollywood. Is the movie Eyes Wide Shut, is that a reality? Is that a reality movie?
Oh, wow. You're talking about one of my favorite directors. We're talking about a guy called Stanley Kubrick.
Mm-hmm.
He's the man who made Eyes Wide Shut. I have to tell you that a lot of folks will not agree with this, but I think Eyes Wide Shut, it's really about, it's about relationships and about the frustration of relationships. That's really what that story is about. Kubrick did other movies that are simply amazing. His greatest film, of course, was 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't get better than that.
No.
Yeah, that is the top of the heap when it comes to sci-fi, and it's my all-time favorite film in the history of the universe. I absolutely treasure that film because I think it's absolutely a masterful. It's artistic, it's thought-provoking, it's entertaining. A lot of people come out of it and they say, "What the dickens was that about?" Well,
No, I love that show, and I didn't. But let me ask you something. Didn't he do Capricorn 1?
No, he didn't do Capricorn 1. Capricorn 1 is another good movie, but he did Clockwork Orange.
Okay, because I was thinking Capricorn 1, didn't it basically say that the moon landing was faked?
Yeah, Capricorn 1 was about a mission to Mars that went wrong.
Okay.
And it was a 70s film. It's a good movie. I ran it again recently. It still holds. If folks haven't seen it, it's a good piece of entertainment at Capricorn 1.
Some of the older movies are better. And
yeah, no question.
Hey, by the way, obviously you've met a lot of people, interviewed a lot of people. If you know people now that you know how this show goes and what the conversation, how it goes and that type of thing, if you feel like there's any that you know, any people that you know that would be a good match for the show, just drop me a line. And
thank you. I will absolutely do that.
Okay.
Yes, of course. I'll give that some thought. But thank you for the invite. That's
Okay.
I'll certainly do that. Yes.
All right, Lionel. And how'd you like the format and how this show went for you tonight?
I think it was good. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate being on it. Thank you for inviting me. I'm grateful. I love meeting people like you, and I love talking to the people who listen to your show. People with inquiring minds. The most important thing is to have an inquiring mind. It's not about going to Walmart, right? It's about what lies on the other side of the universe. That's what it's about.
Right. Right. I don't want to know what's on aisle 5. Okay. I want to know what's on Saturn 5 going on the rocket going to Pluto, man. That's what I want to know. Well, Lionel Friedberg, I appreciate you coming on the program. Can we have you on again sometime?
I'd love to.
Okay.
I'd love that.
All right. I'll appreciate you coming on the show. I'll send you links when it's edited and uploaded.
Thank you, Dan. And I will put it on my website to promote the show.
I appreciate
and get it out there. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me on. I really do appreciate this. Right. And thanks for listening to all your listeners and your viewers.
All right. We'll speak again.
Yeah. Take care. All the best.
All right. Bye-bye.
God bless.